I want to return to Labor's secrecy, its obsession with secrecy, and the whole issue of the repatriation of the so-called ISIS brides. I'd prefer to call them Islamic State co-conspirators or co-collaborators. It was late last week the documents revealed the Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, had those meetings behind closed doors with Save the Children, who were lobbying to bring these women to Australia. The whole issue became a focal point of estimates last week, at which ministers and bureaucrats were at pains to insist that they didn't in fact repatriate the cohort. That word's interesting. Join me now, someone who knows a lot about the subject, Director of Strategic Analysis Australia, Peter Jennings. Well, Peter, you've written about this today, and for all the promises they made prior to being elected that they would be transparent, where rightly they accused the Scott Morrison government of not being transparent, Labor's addicted to secrecy. They're not transparent at all.
They sure are, Peter, and that's been a theme of Labor in government for the last 4 years now. At every stage of the way, from the fact that we now have to pay to have access to freedom of information, it's no longer free. The fact that my old department, the Defence Department, is now classifying and refusing to release information about projects which used to be publicly available in an annual report. The fact even that the Prime Minister says to journalists at press gatherings, you only get one question and no follow-ups, and everyone kind of quietly goes along with that. At every stage and in every way, this government is trying to hold back or contain information or make sure that its spin dominates and no one else can get a word in. And we're seeing that with the ISIS brides, this repatriation process, where the government is being exceptionally clever in how it goes about trying to say that it had nothing to do with it. It turns out that they seem to be collaborating quite effectively with a non-government organisation to allow it to happen. And we go through the very painful experience of watching senior bureaucrats at Senate committee hearings all of a sudden being unable to remember meetings that they actually attended without getting clarification from the minister sitting at the table. It's all about information management. It's deeply damaging to democracy and to making good policy, and this government is becoming an absolute specialist at doing that.
You've sat in plenty of these very senior meetings with prime ministers and senior ministers, and when a bureaucrat is asked to leave the room, as Tony Burke asked the bureaucrats to leave the room so he could have private conversations with the lobby group, that tells you everything you need to know.
It sure does. And, you know, typically what ministers and prime ministers want is they want officials in the room to keep an honest record of what's going on. Can a minister actually have a private conversation with a non-government organisation? I mean, it really shouldn't be allowed to happen. And I think it's highly suspect. You know, Peter, just quickly, I reflect that the Trump administration thanked the Spanish government for repatriating a couple of people out of a Syrian refugee camp recently. Our government could have decided to actually explain what it was doing and make a virtue of the fact that it was bringing these Australians back. It's chosen, however, to do it in the sneakiest way possible, which I think just makes people more suspicious. But that's a theme about how this government actually runs all areas of public policy.
Let's go to all the problems with the renewables rollout. I've spoken about the logistics, the engineering hurdles. In fact, we've had another one, offshore wind in Gippsland, fall over. But I'm concerned, given your security background, with the influence of Beijing in a lot of these companies. We know one company in particular is chaired by a serving Communist Party official. This is a $200 million solar project in Brisbane, near Bendigo, beg your pardon, in Victoria. It's getting big money out of taxpayers. It's been awarded funding out of the Capacity Investment Scheme run by Chris Bowen. How concerned should we be here?
Look, we should be desperately concerned. This government is forgetting all of the lessons of, hard decisions taken by past governments, for example, to keep China out of the 5G IT rollout. And there's really two big reasons for concern. One is that we're making ourselves more and more dependent on a state which does not have Australia's best interests at heart. The Chinese have their own strategic objectives. The second reason is that we're seeing Chinese technology increasingly becoming the dominant factor at Australian critical infrastructure. So the grid, ports, airports, all manners of IT connectivity. This gives China the capacity to do damage to Australia's critical infrastructure during moments of international crisis. It's something that has the Americans worried, and the Europeans, and frankly any other country that's capable of looking after its critical infrastructure. And we're largely ignoring it, all for the sake of convenience, I suppose, and perhaps slightly cheaper contracts. Australia has got to wake up to this. Being more dependent on China is a bad thing, and having China deeply enmeshed and controlling Australian critical infrastructure, that's even worse, particularly because it gives China the capacity to turn things off or do damage during moments of international crises.
All right, we've got the AUSMIN talks coming up. We know they're held every year, alternates between Australia and the United States. It's Defence Minister, Foreign Minister and their counterparts, in this case, Miles, Wong, Hegseth, Rubio. Already there are strong messages out there from the Americans to say we must lift our defence spending. There was all those sort of fake announcements, money on the long finger, prior to the Prime Minister finally having that meeting with Donald Trump. I think that bought him a modicum of silence in the room, but there's nowhere to hide now. The Americans can see that the money's not real. The money's not in the immediate budget forward numbers. And of course, they're sending pretty tough messages, the Americans, to the Europeans on NATO. I don't think we're going to get away with this unscathed, nor should we, Peter, nor should we.
No, absolutely not. And, we really should be doing this because it's important for our own defence, not just to please the Americans. But I think that this is going to be a very tough meeting. I think the Americans will say, OK, well, we've now decided to provide you with our nuclear technology for submarines, but you Australians, you've got to be prepared to pay for it. Show us where these ships are going to be based. Show us how you're going to store the nuclear waste. Where are the naval crews going to come from? There's many, many areas where we are just failing to, with sufficient speed, gear up to be able to take on that nuclear technology. And so the Americans realise that we're dragging the chain. And I think when it comes to this meeting in DC, we're going to have some pretty hard messages read to us about the need to lift spending, and not at the end of the decade, Peter, but this year and over the next few years, and to do so quickly in the way that Taiwan is and a number of other countries. Our government has fought against that, but the time has now come. And I think there'll be it'll be a lot of tough love in DC when our ministers get together with their American counterparts.
Well, we'll see if it makes a difference. We'll leave it there. Thank you.